Hey, it's Drybear. We're continuing our series of covering leveling builds to get you started into endgame for all of the classes in Path of Exile 2, and today I bring you a monk build focused primarily on freezing and the cold element. Now, so far, I had heard rumors that people were struggling with monk or talking about how difficult monk is, but honestly, after finishing these two lightning builds that we did for the monk, and then this ice build, I can tell you that monk is definitely one of the stronger levelers in the game. Very, very powerful. If you know what you're doing, you do the skill tree correctly, and you set up the right stats, they are absolute dominating powerhouses of damage, and ice or cold is no exception to that. For this one, we're going to be using a lot of freeze and cold buildup with several ice skills. Unlike my Tempest build, which is basically a one-stop shop, one ability, Tempest Flurry, is enough to kill anything in the game with a bell on top of it. This one, you actually have a little bit more flexibility in which ones you use. The primary on this for trash clearing is going to be Ice Strike, which is when you get relatively early on in Act 1, you can just pick it up, and it's this hit chain combo. It's like the ice variant of Tempest Flurry, and it's great. You see it on screen, it's kind of pumping around. It has excellent freeze buildup, it can freeze targets, it does a good amount of damage, and it is able to shatter enemies that freeze all in one go. However, unfortunately, unlike Tempest Flurry, I find that it is not as good for a single target. A lot of times you'll just be spending a lot of time trying to kill the target. It's great if you can freeze and shatter a target, but if a target cannot be shattered or you can't properly consume the freeze, I feel like the build is incomplete, and I would be remiss giving you a leveling build that is not fully complete and fully sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine two of the best early game abilities with the Glacial Cascade as well as the Locust in order to give us extra bonus damage. You can actually build Ice Strike to be your AoE mob pack clearer, and then use Glacial Cascade with Longshot to destroy any single target. It has perfect range, great damage, and great flexibility overall. And they're also going to bring in a AoE with the Frost Nexus to be able to create a lot of space for us to freeze enemies. And what you'll do is you'll basically be using your Ice Strike when there's a lot of enemies around, or you feel like it's safe to melee. If it's not safe to melee, you can just back up, throw out tons of ice to freeze everybody, Glacial Cascade to finish them off until it's safer. You can see you get the freeze there. Glacial Cascade, boom, right back to melee. It's a very safe mix and match between the two. It gives you excellent damage, and just like the lightning-focused builds, we're going to do pure elemental on this one with physical damage on our weapon to make sure we scale properly, and everything just goes very easily as you move through your leveling process, through normal, through cruel, to endgame start of Atlas. As always, I have a one-sheet reference for this, all the abilities, the support gems, the recommended weapon setup for this, and the talent tree from a glance. You can see where we're going with that, which we'll talk about in a second, and a general thought process on how to use the abilities and what to do. And for the people that prefer a full calculator site with the stats and everything, I have it put up on mobalytics.com as a page. Make sure you give it a favorite if you do like the build, and then that's going to be there. So I'll have those both linked down below in the comments and in the description. Now let's talk about the build and the functionality overall. There's a couple things that you'll want to start out with. When you begin the game, you're basically going to be using Glacial Cascade with your Frozen Locust. The first two frost abilities that you get. Glacial Cascade is a very simple wave mechanic, but one thing that's really important to know is that while it does do okay damage, the primary damage source for this is going to be at the very end, and it is a fixed distance as well. So when you fire off Glacial Cascade, you'll see that giant spike at the end. That's what you're looking for maximum damage. We're even going to run Longshot on it as well for extra damage when they're far away. This gives us a huge boost on single target damage, and it should be plenty for you while leveling. Of course, it is Path of Exile 2. If you have a decent weapon, meleeing is perfectly fine for the first like 10, 15 levels, even beyond that as well, as long as you're keeping up with your bonus damage on that as well. So you've got this going for you. The other thing you have is Frozen Locust. This ability feels super underwhelming at first because all it does is pull you back a little bit, create a chilled ground in the area, and create a little icicle. However, this icicle is shatterable by either you or the enemy that's coming towards you. So if you use this as a way to block projectiles, or if there's a big rare ahead of you or a unique boss and they smash this on accident and they break it, it will do a bunch of frost buildup. And the cool part about the Glacial Cascade is that if it hits a target that is currently frozen, like if this big spike at the end hits a target that's frozen, it will do a metric boatload load of damage. It hits unbelievably hard with that final hit, and that's what we really care about, right? You can see the damage is much, much higher. So this is kind of just poking damage. Hitting in between is not that great, but you're going to be using the poke at the end to deal damage to targets. And this is going to be your primary way to deal damage pretty much while going through the campaign on single target as well. You can actually do things to freeze the target and then go straight in to shatter them with that spike, but that gives excellent single target damage. Then once you unlock Ice Strike, this is going to be your bread and butter basically while you're leveling through most encounters except for rares and for really tanky magic mobs, but also unique monsters as well. So this is your your Tempest Flurry equivalent of ice. It's a hit chain that goes like this. You have a whole bunch of hits, and then the last hit does a bunch of freeze buildup and also can shatter enemies as well. This thing is a powerhouse for mobbing. You can just, as you go through enemies, whack them, destroy them, burn them down very easily. And then you'll find that when you get to single target, it can slow down quite a bit because either you don't have enough frost buildup or freeze buildup to make the single target worth it, or generally you're just not freezing them at all, which means you're just not getting as much damage output out of it from that as well. And also there are definitely times because the Ice Strike is slower on average than the Tempest Flurry. Sometimes you'll just get interrupted. Like you'll go to a big pack of mobs, and while you're trying to do this, you keep getting interrupted over and over and over again. And I find that it's easier just to back up, use Wave of Frost to freeze as many targets as possible, line at the right distance, and then hit them with a Glacial Cascade, and they will all shatter and explode on top of each other. Keep in mind as well that when you have Frozen Locust, this is a destructible. If you put it under big monsters like large hitboxes, it will shatter instantly. So against large unique monsters that have big hitboxes, you can just get right up next to them and just spam this over and over, and it'll have crazy frost buildup because it'll shatter immediately. We also have some ways in the skill tree as well to allow us to cause additional, like we can reduce the life of the ice crystal with the shattered crystal piece here on the talent tree, and also by picking up icicle we can have even less life, which means that if you put it on top of someone, it's going to shatter almost instantly and give you a big bonus there where it explodes, gives the frost buildup, and also deals damage. Now for that standpoint, like I said, Frozen Locust, Glacial Cascade will start out, then you'll get Ice Strike around like very early on in Act 1. Once you have an uncut gem level 5, which is pretty quick in the game, you'll pick up Ice Strike. Then as you move forward past Act 1, you should be able to pick up Wave of Frost maybe towards the end, and this gives you your big freeze buildup combo with Glacial Cascade. You do have options later on for picking up, say, like Shattering Palm. This does have some really cool synergy where you can actually cause even bigger explosions, but it does have a higher cost in animation, and it's one extra step to do during the process. This is something that I would recommend you picking up and using for endgame, and if you want to use it just in general, just for funsies, I think it can be very strong. It does a bunch of damage in AoE, but again, having to do, like, for me, when it comes to leveling builds, I like them to be very easy to get online, do lots of damage by themselves, and also have as small or short of a rotation as possible. If you have to do 5 or 6 abilities in sequence in order to clear trash mobs, I feel like that's not a very good leveling build because it's just too cumbersome and takes too much time and effort, and I think something like that tends to build into it. But again, as you move into Cruel, you may want to pick up Shattering Palm and play around with it. Now for this, we're actually going to take a similar path to my Tempest build, where we just try to take advantage of as much raw damage as possible early on in the game and get as much chill and freeze buildup as we possibly can. The big thing here is that generally the way I've optimized my leveling builds is you don't really need to get defenses pre-Atlas as long as you're upgrading your equipment properly, getting enough of the main defensive stat that you need to keep things rocking. So if you're running evasion, run high evasion. You want to make sure you're having around like 50% plus of armor or evasion or energy shield, depending on what you're building for your character, and make sure you stay above 20% on all the normal elemental resistances while leveling, and you should be set. And it's much easier to get evasion or armor or energy shield or all of those extra defensive stats from your gloves, belts, boot, rings, amulet, headpiece, and chest than it is to try and get damage out of those items and replace that there. So generally, I like going for more damage inside of the tree early on and just make sure that you're using your gear properly to keep yourself survivable. However, we're going to take this side of the tree. We're going to go energy shield and evasion, pick up the mana regeneration because we do spam quite a lot. Movement speed is quite nice. We're going to grab the freeze build buildup plus extra cold damage here. And then we're going to take the attribute highway straight to this little pocket. This gives you a metric boatload of elemental damage, which is awesome, because if you're running with a quarterstaff that has high physical damage, what's great about the frost skills inside of the monk tree is that they have such a high conversion of physical damage to cold damage. So you can see Ice Strike is 80% physical. So most of the damage that we get from a physical weapon that's well built is going to give us a lot of cold damage as well. And then when we have elemental damage, it'll then subsequently increase that, which makes the whole build very strong for leveling. We also get extra damage if we've chilled an enemy recently, so this should be basically on all the time. Then from there, you have two main pockets of nodes that you want to get to. The first one is going to be this pocket up here in the top left. This will give you a nice jewel slot. You can put physical damage or cold damage on this. Crit is pretty decent for cold as well, if you can get enough of it, just because the burst is so high. And then recommend grabbing this side of the tree. Like, getting all of this cold damage in the middle is very good. Being able to get freeze buildup is also very nice between these. And also +1 level to all cold skills is pretty rare in the passive tree, so it's nice to grab that as well. Then you can also get magnitude here, though while leveling it won't be as important. And the other pack that I really recommend going to get as well is going to be this one right down here. You do have to attribute highway a little bit to get there. It will give you a jewel slot as well, which is super nice, but then you'll get a whole bunch of chill or cold damage across these. But what's even better is that you can ignore non-negative elemental resistance of frozen enemies without having to get it from the invoker Ascendancy. It gives you cast and cold, like cast speed with cold skills, which helps a whole bunch. And you also get freeze buildup and damage with hits against frozen enemies. So this thin ice will be a huge gain for your Glacial Cascade, especially with long shot. So if you can actually use Ice Strike to get Ice Bite active, which gives you cold damage on top of everything, you also have long shot going on the full shot. The Glacial Cascade hits a frozen enemy and you trigger thin ice from this. The burst damage is insane. I was pretty much one-shotting all rares and was able to burn down bosses very quickly only with Glacial Cascade, just for a single target, and then using Ice Strike for AoE and for just random mobs that got in my way. From this top portion here, as you move into Cruel, you can come down here and get these elemental nodes all through here. You will get a lot more build-up from these, and that's going to be super useful, like on the ones on the top here. That'll be super useful if you continue using Glacial Cascade as your single target burst. You also have some penetration here on the cold side, and then if you can work your way down from this, there are some decent nodes on the other side as well. And of course, you can also grab the elemental from the ranger side, which is just a stone's throw away from the starting point of monk. This is going to give you a good amount of elemental damage, as well as some freeze buildup and some penetration through cold resistance. And it's very important if you don't end up going through the elemental resistance through Sunder My Enemies, which I wouldn't recommend doing. The only reason this is here, this is not going to be the build I use. I actually was working on an Unbound Avatar build before this. I had 3 support gems put into Unbound Avatar, and then when I respect, I went to Unbound Avatar, I respect from Elemental Expression. I lost all the support gems. I tried to respect to get them back, and they're just gone. If you put any support gems into one of these and you switch without removing them, they're just gone. So for this, I would recommend, for the Ascendancy, I'd recommend going this way as well. But that's the build up there. So you're gonna have these elemental options here. If you really wanted to, you could also come down to some of the elemental options down here, since you're close to it from the ranger side. But from this point, I would recommend just using this with the sorceress build up and the extra damage from cold to get you through campaign normal, campaign cruel, and then you can figure out what you want to do for endgame. If you want to fully respect, make a completely different build, or you want to build this ice kind of build for more of a late game variant for mapping and beyond. Then again, for the Invoker Ascendancy, don't look at this, because I was robbed of like 40,000 gold to do this. What I recommend is getting the Magnitude of Chill, Chilled Ground, increased elemental damage, and then the Unbound Avatar. And on Unbound Avatar, I would just put Persistence to give you extra duration. It's base duration of like 9 seconds. You can make that almost 13 seconds with Persistence just to scale it up. Gives you a nice bit of damage. You will basically want to freeze single target like a boss, freeze them, pop Unbound Avatar, and then consume the freeze with Glacial Cascade, and then just go back to Ice Striking over and over, or using things like Wave of Frost or Frozen Locust to get some freeze buildup on the target for single target. Once you have this, there's actually a couple places you could go. Like, you could really do, if you're gonna do an Energy Shield build, you could go for Meditate. I think there's also some defensive options up here you might want for late game once you decide to push into maps. You're not gonna be going super crit build. You could, if you really wanted to, like maybe you use the raw elemental damage to beat through the cruel and get to endgame, and then you respec for more of a crit build using the crit nodes on the burst for ice, or you can even try a tri or dual element build for the avatar state just to get extra damage from that. But I think this is basically a very straightforward. This and the Tempest build are so easy, so straightforward, so much damage. It's such a breeze to level monk this way. I'll also mention that I do like long shot on Glacial Cascade just for the single target burst. I do like running Crescendo and Ice Bite on Ice Strike. What's weird about this is that it means that you're losing a little bit of damage initially on your Ice Strike, but Ice Strike is the one that's going to freeze targets the most, which means you'll get an active use of Ice Bite to get the extra damage on you. And it also means that you can use Ice Bite to freeze the target, then switch to Glacial Cascade in order to do the damage on the single target that you need, and then go right back to doing Ice Strike as well. But this is just a very, very simple build. And then now we get to move into the other elements for Monk. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.